Vav Amid Beis by the Gemara. I want to make one point because I took something for granted. The Gemara started off by saying, the Mishnah started off by saying that if you cook a thigh meat with the Giranosha, it's noisin tam. Now noisin tam, for all intents and purposes, is translated as shishim. You need shishim. But technically, noisin tam is not shishim. Noisin tam means it's a problem if there's imparted flavor. Meaning, if you taste the Giranosha, then we have a problem. If you don't taste the Giranosha, then we're fine. We don't taste it, obviously, so we just go with Shishim. But technically, as the Gemara is going to point out, you don't actually go with Shishim right away, according to the Gemara. It's not how we paskin. According to the Gemara, you don't automatically go with Shishim. What you do is, you have a guy taste it, and if he tastes it, then it's a problem, and if he doesn't taste it, then that's fine. So I just wanted to point that out. So when it says, it doesn't actually say shishim in the Gemara. It just says you go with flavor, and what you do is you have a guy taste it. Okay, Zak the Gemara, the beginning of Tzadi Vav Amid Beis, the end of Tzadi Vav Amid Beis by the Gemara. Amar Shmuel, Loi Shanu Elishin is Baal Shaba. This requirement to have taste, or let's say shishim, is only when they're cooked together. Meaning you have the Giranosha is cooked in the thigh. Aval Nitzlaba, but if it was only roasted means that it's cooked without liquid. Roasting does not permeate to the same extent. The flavor doesn't travel as far when you roast it, because roasting is without a liquid, and liquid is the medium that travels. Therefore, if it's roasted together, if you roast it, you don't actually need shishim. All you need is kedei klipa. What that means is the little layer on top. So you just remove the little layer around the giranosha, and then you're fine. It's called kedei klipa. That's what's needed by roasting. Roasting does not cook all the way shishim. It just cooks a little bit around. Aini, is this true? So you're telling me that roasting does not permeate. You don't need shishim by roasting. All you need is kedei klipa. Is that true? Vam Rav Huna, but didn't Rav Huna say, Gedish etzaloi b'chelvai? If a goat is roasted in chaylev, in its fat, meaning you have a goat that has natural chaylev in it, and you roast it with its fat, so we just got finished saying that roasting only permeates kedei klipa, a small amount around the iser, so l'chora, you should be able to eat the goat, just minus the klipa around the chaylev, but that's not the halacha. It says, Aser le'echel afilu mereish onai. You're not allowed to eat even at the tip of its ear, meaning the entire goat is a problem. So does roast permeate entirely, or does it only go kedei klipa? So the Gemara says, Shani chaylev de mifafeya. Roasting generally only goes kedei klipa, except by fat. Fat is so moist that it's as if it's cooking together. So roasting generally only goes kedei klipa, unless the iser is very, very fatty, in which case roasting will go to the point where you need shishim. So says the Gemara, so you're telling me that fat is very fatty, chaylev is very fatty, and therefore roasting is a problem that you need shishim, you need a shishim as well? Ubechaylev aser, is that true? We just got finished saying that if you roast a goat in its fat, meaning you have fat in a goat and you roast it together, the fat permeates throughout the entire goat. The chaylev goes throughout the entire goat, and it's a problem, you need shishim. Is that true? V'omer Rabbi Chana, but didn't Rabbi Chana say, Uvda hava kamei de Rav Yochanan b'chanishta de Mon? A ma'isa happens to Rav Yochanan in the Beis Medrash of Mon, b'gdish etzalo b'chelvoi, mamish this case, we had a goat that you roasted in its fat. So we said before that the entire goat is a problem. But this version of the story is, Asu shailu Rav Yochanan, they asked Rav Yochanan, V'amar koy levoichel shmegil chelvoi. He said, just pull off a layer of a peel around the iser. So the first version said that if you roast a goat in its fat, the entire goat is a problem. But now he's saying the entire goat is not a problem. You just isolate the fat, you remove the layer of meat around the fat, and you're fine. So do you need shishim or not by roasting fat? So says the Gemara, Ha'u kachashava, that goat was very, very lean. Generally, a fatty goat, if you roast it, the iser will go kedei shishim. It'll go entirely throughout the goat. This goat happened to be very lean, and therefore it's not an issue. Rav Huna, that's the first answer. Again, the question...
It's not an issue because the animal is so lean.
So then the roasting will only go kedei klipa, it won't go all the way shishim.
What's the definition of lean?
Now, that's the first answer for the Gemara. Again, we're machmer anyway. We're machmer because we don't know what lean is. The Shulchan Aruch is machmer. But anyway, so the point is that the question was that this goat that Rav Yochanan had, that they roasted, he did not say the entire goat is a problem. What about the fact that it's roasting and it's fatty? So the first answer is that it was a lean goat. The second answer is Rav Huna bar Yehuda Amar Kulya b'chel v'halva v'sharya. The second answer is that it wasn't roasting a goat in its fat; it was roasting the kidney with its fat. And above the fat of the kidney, there's a membrane. So if it was just roasting the goat in its fat, itaka would permeate the entire goat, it would be a problem. Over here, though, because there's a membrane on top of the kidney, and it was dafka the kidney that was roasted, not the rest of the goat, and the membrane stops the permutation from the fat, and therefore that's the exception. In other words, if it was just regular chaylev, it would be a problem. But over here, because it's a kidney, and there's a membrane on top of the kidney, the membrane stops the fat from penetrating the rest of the goat. That's the second pshat. And the third pshat, the third answer from the Gemara says, is Ravin bar Rav'ada Omar. The case was not roasting, and it wasn't roasting a goat. You actually misunderstood the case b'chlal. It wasn't that case at all. Kilvis be'ilfis have. It was actually a case of a kilchis, which is a non-kosher fish, that they found in a pot of meat. Meaning the entire case is not what you thought. It wasn't roasting a goat. It was that they made a pot of meat, and they found a non-kosher fish in it. They asked Rabbi Yochanan, what's the halacha with this meat? Because it was a non-kosher fish in the pot. And he said, have a guy taste it. In other words, he did require shishim. But Rabbi Yochanan's opinion was that you don't automatically go shishim. You have a guy taste the pot. If he tastes the non-kosher fish in the pot of meat, it's a problem. If not, not. So the point was, it wasn't the case of roasting at all. It was a case of cooking a non-kosher fish in a pot of meat. Amar Rava says, now we've been saying till now, I've been saying the word shishim, but every time the Gemara says taste, the Gemara actually means that you should have someone taste it. So if I have a piece of chazer that falls into chicken, the Gemara would say taste it. Let me ask you a question. Who's going to taste chazer? How do you taste it? How do you get a yid to taste it? What type of yid can taste the chicken to see if there's chazer? So the Gemara is going to speak out. The tasting that you're going to do is a goy. You have to have a goyish chef taste it, and it's a tremendous chiddush, by the way. It means that we allow you to be soymech on a goy, which is usually like, why would we believe a guy? And the guy says, I don't taste the chicken over here. So the Gemara is going to point out, we're talking about a chef who has a reputation, and he's Mesiach Lefitumai, according to the Rishonim. Mesiach Lefitumai means that he doesn't know that we're relying on him. We're just asking his expertise, and he happens to tell us, I don't taste any chazer, then it's fine. So says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Mereish have a koshle hatatanya. Rava says, I was originally bothered by the following brisa. What does the brisa say? Keder shabishal v'basar lo yivashu b'chalav. If you have a fleshik pot, you're not allowed to cook milk in a fleshik pot. V'imbishal, and if you did, b'noisin tam. If the milk has the meat flavor, then it's a problem. In other words, if I take a meat pot and I cook mac and cheese in it, so if the mac and cheese has meat flavor, then it's a problem. In other words, you have to taste the mac and cheese, see if there's a meat flavor in it. Because again, the Gemara doesn't just automatically go shishim. So you got to have someone taste it. So Rava said originally, I didn't understand, who's going to taste this, who's going to take the chance? You're going to go over to a yid and ask him to taste the mac and cheese to see if there's meat in it? Who would take such a risk? That was my question. Similarly, the Brisa says, "Betruma lo yevasha b'chulin." If you have a pot that was used for truma, you're not allowed to use it for chulin. Im bishul, and if you use the pot for chulin, meaning if you have a pot that was used for truma and you accidentally cooked chulin in it, so can I eat the noodles? I have a truma pot and you cook noodles in the pot. Can I eat the noodles? I'm a non-kayin. So if there's flavor of truma in the noodles, then it's a problem. If not, not. So what's the halacha? So the halacha, the Brisa says, Noisin Tam, taste it. Now, tasting the noodles with the truma is not such a big deal. I'll go to a kayin and I'll say, hey, do you taste truma? If he tastes truma, then I won't eat the noodles. If he doesn't taste truma, I'll eat the noodles. Because truma is at least permissible to a yid. But says Rava, Bishloim truma toimle kayin. Elabasa b'chalav man toimle. Rava said, I was bothered. Who's going to taste this basa b'chalav? I didn't understand. When it says taste it, who's tasting this basa b'chalav? But Hashadam Rav Yochanan, but then I heard Rav Yochanan explain Samchinon Akfela Arma, that we allow ourselves to rely on a goyish chef. So because he's a chef, he has a good palate. He also knows he has a reputation. So then we could rely on a guy. So Hachanami Samchina Akfela Arma. So that's the case. You go over to a goyish chef and say, hey, do you taste chazer in this pot? Do you taste bas b'chalav in these? Do you taste meat in these mac and cheese? If he says I don't taste meat, then I can eat the mac and cheese, and if not, not. And it's a tremendous chiddush that we're relying on a guy. Again, we don't rely on goyim anymore. We just go with shishim. But in the times of the Gemara, they would rely on goyim, And you have to know exact permutation, exact case. Does he know we're relying on him? Is he Mesiach Fitumai or not? Again, that's all discussions brought down at the beginning of Hilchos Taruvos. Amar Rava explains, throughout Shas you have different ways to deal with mixtures of kosher and non-kosher. Amar Rabbanan B'taima. Sometimes the Rabbanan said you have a person taste it, okay, meaning a Jew tasting it. Sometimes you'll have in Shas that the Gemara will say let a Jew taste it. Amar Rabbanan B'kfeila. Sometimes the Gemara would say that we have a goy tasting it. So sometimes the Gemara will mention a Jew tasting it. Sometimes the Gemara will mention a goy should taste it. Go to the next page. And sometimes the Gemara says you go with shishim. So what's the rule? When do I have a Jew taste it? When do I have a goy taste it? When do I go with shishim? So the Gemara says very simple. This is the rule. Hilkach. Min b'she'enai minai the hetera. Min b'she'enai minai means you have a mixture of two items that don't taste the same. So I have a mixture of chicken and meat. They don't taste the same. And they're both mutter. So what's the example? Truma. I have a piece of truma that gets mixed into non-truma. It's all kosher. They don't taste the same. So then we rely on a Jewish person to taste it. We give it to a kohen because he could legitimately taste it. That's when samchinon b'taima, we rely on a yid. Now the isura, let's say it's not truma. Let's say it's chazer. Chazer falls into my noodles. And I don't know the ratio. I don't know if it's too much chazer. I don't know the amounts. So then you go to a goyish chef and you ask them, hey, taste the noodles. Do you taste chazer? If he tastes chazer, then it's a problem. If he doesn't taste chazer, then it's fine. So if it's truma and it's permissible, then you have a Jew taste it. If you're dealing with isurim, then you can't have a Jew taste it, then you have a goy taste it. So when do you go with shishim? Min b'minoi deleka l'mekem atayma. You know when you go with shishim? What if they're isurim, but they taste the same? I'll give you an example. You have treif chicken, non-kosher chicken, and kosher chicken that gets mixed together. What are you going to do? You ask a guy to taste it? You know what he's going to taste? Chicken. It's all the same. They all taste the same. So if they're min b'mino, because they all taste the same, you can't rely on a guy tasting it because there's no discernible flavor. Or it's min b'she'enai minoi and there is no chef around. So if it's min b'minai, meaning it's min b'minai and they taste the same, so you can't rely on tasting, obviously, or it's min b'she'enai minai, but there's no guy around to taste it. I don't have a guy. In those situations, then you go with shishim. So you go with shishim if it's min b'minai, or if it's min b'she'enai minai, but you cannot have a guy taste it because there is no guy around, practically. So says the Gemara, min b'minai deleka mekamatayma, inam b'she'enai minai v'leka kfeila, that's shishim. That's when we go with shishim. Okay. Here's the halacha. These things are very negeh for the laws of kashrus. So we talked about cooking. If you cook something, you need shishim. If you roast something together and it's not fatty, all you got to do is peel off the layer around the iser. What about salting things together? We know there's a concept in halacha that if you salt things together, there could also be a transfer of flavors. So says the Gemara, Hanu atmasa de'imlachi be'reish galusa begidanashya. There were these thighs that in the Reish Galusa's house, they salted the thighs together with the Gid Anasha. So that's a problem. So the question is, what do you need to fix this? You salted it together. Do you need shishim, or do you just need klipa? So Ravina Asar, Ravina said the entire thing is Asar, meaning you need shishim. Rabbi Ashi Shari. Rabbi Ashi says, no, don't be so machmer. Peel off a little bit and you're fine. In other words, there was a machlokes as to how far the Gid Anasha will penetrate when they salted it together. So the Gemara explains, let me just say it outside. The Gemara is going to say the halacha is very clear that it's not going to be an issue. Why? The rule is maliach kiroseach, which means salting is like roasting, and kavush, soaking, which means if two items are soaked together in a liquid, hareu kimavushal. Soaking is like cooking, that you need shishim. But salting is only kirisech, it's like roasting. And therefore, it only penetrates kadei klipa. So therefore, because they salted the Gid Anasha with the other meat, it only penetrated kadei klipa, and therefore, it should be mutter, you don't need shishim. Also, Shan by Rav Ashi. They asked my Rav Ashi, what's the halacha? Amalei Abashari. He says it's mutter, meaning you don't need shishim. Why? Amar Ravina, my daitich. Why are those machmer? Why was Ravina machmer that you need shishim? Damer Shmuel. Well, it's based on the presumption that salting can penetrate. Maliach haru karaseach. Salting is like cooking with heat. But kavush, pickling or soaking things together for 24 hours, if you soak two things together for 24 hours, it's akin as if they were cooking. Kavush hareu kumavushal. Here's the problem. Ha'amr Shmuel lo yishanul shenis bashal ba avol nitzah ba kailef oichal shemigil agid. Even though salting is like roasting, but roasting only penetrates kedei klipa. So what's the issue over here? And don't tell me that salting is like cooking, that it needs shishim, because when Shmuel said his shita, he said salting is like heat, roasting, soaking is like cooking, which means soaking needs shishim, but salting does not. Says the Gemara, the fact that it says soaking is like cooking implies that salting is like roasting. So why do I need shishim? Kasha, that's a good kasha. Meaning you're right. You don't need shishim when you salt it together. Okay. Weiter. Now, Amr Rav Chanina, Kishehem Meshayrin. We know that you need shishim, yeah? So I have chazer that falls into, a chicken soup. So we say you need shishim. What are you calculating the shishim? What are you using to calculate shishim? So you have the chicken, you got the onions, you got the broth, you got the spices, you got the bones. So the halach is all of it. You use all of it to calculate shishim. More than that, the Gemara says, Kishen Meshayrin, Meshayim Beroitiv, you use the broth, Ubekipa and the bits of meat, Ubechatichas and the large pieces of chicken, Ubekadera and even the pot itself. Because the point is that once there's shishim, then the chazer is going to equally distribute it fully to the point where once there's shishim, it's insignificant. So as long as there's room for it to be distributed, you figure that out for shishim. So it can be distributed amongst the chicken, it can be distributed amongst the broth, it can be distributed amongst the spices, and even the pot itself absorbs. So if let's say the pot is 30 ounces, that means it could absorb 30 ounces worth of chazer. Now, some say you can actually use the volume of the metal of the pot itself, because the pot itself is absorbent, and therefore you could use that metal as part of the shishim calculations. And some say no, you could only use the amount that's in the walls of the pot, meaning you cannot use the entire volume of the pot itself. How would you figure out volume of a pot? You use displacement. Right? You take the water and you put the pot in, and then the water spills out. That's the volume of the pot. So some say you could use that as part of shishim. And if let's say the volume of the pot is 5 ounces, so then you can use 5 ounces as part of your shishim calculations. And some say no, you can't use the entire walls of the pot, but you could use how much the pot absorbs. Now how do I know how much the pot absorbs? So I'll give you an example. It's a brand new pot, it was only used once, and I cooked 1 ounce of chicken in it. So I know there's 1 ounce in there. So then, if you subsequently cook chicken soup and have chazer fall in, you could use the walls of the pot, 1 ounce of the walls of the pot, because I know there's an ounce in there of kosher food. Again, so there's different versions of how you calculate. Do you calculate using the walls of the pot itself, or the kosher flavor inside the walls of the pot? Okay. Amar Rabavo, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Here's the point. When I'm figuring out shishim means that when I'm figuring out shishim, that means that a piece of chazer falls in. Up to shishim, it'll penetrate and give off its flavor. More than shishim, it won't. Let me ask you a question. What if the chazer that I dropped in, it's very bland? And I'm like, listen, I don't think it would even go shishim. Meaning, do I look at each isser and be like, how spicy is it? So the Gemara says, no. We look at all isurim that fall in as if they're an onion. What do I mean an onion? An onion is a pretty potent flavor. So we don't look at, say, like if you go to the rabbi and the rabbi says, you need shishim if a piece of chazer falls in. Why? Because chazer is able to penetrate up to 60 times its own volume. You can't then say to the rabbi, yeah, but this chazer was bland. It was super bland. I'm sure you wouldn't taste it at 30 times. No. It doesn't work like that. Chazal established that we look at each isser as if it's potent enough to be able to penetrate up to 60 times. Says the Gemara, Kol isur shebetarah meshayin ki'ilu hein betzel b'kaflut. So I'm wait, if you're going to look at like a piece of chazer as if it's like an onion, that it's potent, why not look at it as if it's a jalapeno pepper? And then it'll go, I'll be honest with you, 1 in 60, we say it's nullified. If I make a soup for you and it's 1 in 65 jalapeno pepper, it'll burn your face off, right? Because certain peppers are very, very potent. So once we're saying that we look at like chazer as if it's potent, why not say that we look at it as if it's like mamish, like jalapeno pepper or salt and pepper, or something very, very strong. So the Gemara says, Amrle, shiru chacham de noisin tam b'yisur and yoiser mebetzel v'kafut. Because the average isser is not, the only way you can make a jalapeno pepper be osir, me'ikar hadin osir, is if you did avodah zarah. The average, therefore, because Isurim don't generally come that spicy, Chazal didn't look at it that way. They looked at it as if it's strong flavored, but not insanely spicy. They didn't look at, it's crazy. Okay, a couple more halachas, and we'll finish up with this. Amr Rav Nachman. Okay, gid is b'shishim. So you have a gid anosha that falls in to a pot of soup. I need to make sure that the pot of soup is 60 times the gid. But, ein gid min aminyan. The gid anosha itself is not used as part of the calculation of shishim, which makes a lot of sense. Meaning, you can't say, let's say it's 59 times. The chicken soup that it falls into is 59, right? The gid anosha would make it 60. Does that work? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, I don't know why you look at that. The gid anosha falls in. It's 59 times. No good. But if you count the gid anosha, it's shishim. No good. You can't use the Isser itself as part of Shishim. Shishim means that the Heter is equally absorbing of the Isser. You can't use the Isser itself as part of Shishim. Of course not. You have to. It's the Shishim is outside of the Isser. Except for one thing. And this, I'm not going to go through it fully. This is anyone who learns the laws of Basa B'chol. This is Siman Tzadi, which most yeshivas skip. And that is the laws of Kechol in udder. Udders are very strange, and that is, it's meat, kosher meat, but it has a lot of milk in it, naturally milk. Now, if I cook an udder just on its own, the milk that's naturally found in the udder will cook within the udder itself. Now, that is not basa b'chalav doraisa, because that's called chalav shchuta, which means it's milk from an animal that's dead, because if you're cooking it, that means the animal's dead. But it's asa d'Rabbanan. So it's a very strange situation in that you have meat that's completely kosher, but inside of it, practically, there is milk. So how do I figure out when I'm cooking an udder, what do I need ratio-wise? So I have one udder, I shech the cow, I take the udder, and it falls into my pot of chicken soup. So what do I need? I need shishim keneged the milk in the udder, but I'm allowed to use the udder as part of shishim. It's one of the chidushim, because the udder itself it's not chazer. Right, I can't use the chazer as part of shishim for calculations because the chazer is aser. The udder itself, the meat of the udder itself is not aser. Chazal made it aser because when you begin to cook, the milk will then penetrate. But it itself is actually heter. So you could use that as part of the calculations because the milk will be equally distributed amongst the entire pot, including the udder itself. And therefore the udder can be part of the shishim calculation. It's the chiddush by udders that the udder itself can be part of the shishim calculation. The Gemara says, "Ukechol atzmai min aminyan." Beya b'shishim, an egg that's non-kosher can be nullified in 60. Beya min shishim, but the egg cannot be counted as part of the 60. The only one that can be counted as part of the 60 is the udder. The Gemara speaks it out. Amar Yitzchak b'eder Misharshe ukechol atzmai aser. But the udder itself is still aser. Meaning, if I have an udder that falls into a pot of chicken soup, and the pot of chicken soup is 59 times, but the udder itself makes it shishim, that means the chicken soup is going to be okay. You cannot eat the udder. Why? Because when you begin to cook, the milk that's in the udder will penetrate the udder. So although the udder could be a part of shishim, the udder itself will remain aser after it's cooked.
Because it becomes basa b'chalav.
D'Rabbanan. Now the Gemara says,
Why is it basa b'chalav d'Rabbanan?
Because the milk that's in the udder is from a dead cow. Ukechol atzmai aser, but the udder itself will be aser. The enough l'kdei racheres aser. And by the way, if you were to take this udder, so the udder falls into a pot of chicken soup. With the udder itself, it's shishim, so the chicken soup is fine, but the udder is a problem. I then pick up the udder and I fumble and I drop it into a second pot of soup. that second pot of soup is going to be a problem. Because the udder is able to not only asa the first pot, it'll continue asering multiple pots that it falls in. Rav Ashi, one last point, we'll end with this. Ki havina b'Rav Kahana, when I was b'Rav Kahana, Boilon, I asked the question. Ki mishayrin, when we're trying to figure out the calculations of the udder, right? The udder being nullified in 60. B'di de mishayrin, oi b'may dinafik mine mishayrin. Do you need 60 times the udder itself or the milk found inside the udder itself? In other words, I have an udder that falls into a pot of chicken soup. The rabbi says you have to make sure the shishim. Shishim of what? Shishim corresponding to the udder or corresponding to the milk found inside said udder? Now you're going to ask an obvious question. How do I know how much milk is inside the udder? So the Gemara says, Pshita de b'dei b'sharon. You obviously need shishim connected the entire udder. Why? How do I know how much milk is in it? Well, what am I supposed to take a microscope and look into it? I have no idea. Therefore, you need shishim corresponding to the entire udder, because you have to be choishish. The entire udder is saturated with milk. In other words, if the udder is 2 pounds, I don't know how much. Technically, all I need is shishim corresponding to the milk inside the udder. But I don't know how much milk is inside this udder, and therefore I have to be choishish. All 2 pounds of the udder are saturated with milk, and therefore I need 60 corresponding to the 2 pounds of milk that's found inside the 2 pound udder. But says the Gemara, and we'll end with this, Elameata, if I have shishim corresponding to the entire udder itself, nafal kedera cheres lo yasar, then why isn't the udder permissible? I have 60 times corresponding to the entire udder, so then it should be fine. I'll tell you why. Once there's shishim, that means everything gets equally distributed. So let's say there was 1 pound of milk inside this udder. If I have 60 pounds of chicken soup, it should be fine. Why? The 1 pound of milk will leave the udder, and it will be equally distributed. So why does the udder itself remain aser? So the Gemara says, and we'll end with this, Kivan da Amr of Yitzchak Breiner Mishash Kechol Atzmei Aser Shavir Abana Kechaticha Denavela. The answer is, you're right in a perfect world. In a perfect world, you have 60 corresponding to the amount of milk inside the udder. All the milk leaves, and it's mutter. Here's the problem. We don't know whether that's true. We have to be concerned that all the milk left. But isn't it possible some milk remains inside the udder? In other words, you have an udder that's 1 pound. So that means that there's worst case scenario, there's a pound of milk here. It falls into 60 pounds of chicken. The chicken's fine because it's corresponding to shishim, to the udder. But the udder is going to remain aser. Why? Because there's 2 options over here. Either all the milk left, in which case the udder should also be fine. Or perhaps only half the milk left. So the chicken soup is fine, but the udder still has some milk, basa b'chalav, in it. Because we don't know that all the milk left, we're going to be machmer in all directions. We're going to require shishim corresponding to all the milk. Maybe all the milk will leave, but the udder will remain aser because maybe all the milk did not leave. That's the chashash of Chazal. All right, we'll stop here. Bez Hashem.